Hello and welcome to this week's episode of the Coaching Chapters podcast. I'm joined by Alice and Louise, the co-founders of The Powerhouse, a global leadership development business focused on unlocking human and organizational potential. They are the authors of Smart Conflict: How to Have Hard Conversations at Work. Their book is a highly practical, immediately implementable guide to getting good at healthy conflict at work. I cannot wait to dive in to share more about the topics and concepts of the book. Hello, Alice and Louise. Welcome to the Coaching Chapters podcast. It's so wonderful to have you here today. I have loved your book and I'm so excited to dive in and have that conversation around smart conflict and the work that you're doing in this space. So it'd be so wonderful if you could just introduce yourselves. So we are the co-authors of the book Smart Conflict: How to Have Hard Conversations at Work. Our day jobs are we're the co-founders of a consultancy called The Powerhouse, which is a leadership development and culture change consultancy. So we work globally. We work with enterprises, everything down to sort of SMEs. And we do general leadership development programs at scale, but increasingly more specialized because that's where the needs are in courageous conversations, clear conversations, and how to create the conditions for healthy conflict at work. Great. And then could you tell us a little bit more about what made you want to write a book?
Yeah, sure. So the reason we wrote the book was a couple of factors. One factor is that lots of our clients were asking us for a book that really would help them kind of get under the skin of how to create the environment for healthy conflict and how to support their own teams manage that better. And we were struggling, if we're honest, to kind of find any single point of reference. So there's lots of interesting books that kind of are in and around this subject, but it was really wanting to kind of put the stuff that we were putting together for our clients in the sessions, in our workshops, into kind of one reference point. So that was kind of certainly one driving force, was just creating the book that they were asking for. Also the book that I think we wish we had had earlier in our career. And I know, Benish, that's something that you have shared with us that is something that you could see could have been valuable much earlier in your own career. What's the other reason, Louise?
The other reason that you wrote the book is because we felt, one, obviously we want people to become good at this skill. We do believe it can be one of the most transformational skills in leadership, but just generally professionally. And it's part of our mission to support people to be better humans at work, because everybody then has a more pleasant workspace. But also we wrote the book because we wanted to get it out there with our potential clients, with people who are struggling with this in their teams, with organizations who want to make this kind of culture change, so that they would know kind of how to do it and where to find us when they were ready. Great. No, I love that. And absolutely, I definitely wish I had this earlier on in my career, even before becoming a coach, because it's just a one-stop shop for all the tools, the strategies, the concepts around managing conflict and understanding your own conflict styles. So yeah, absolutely. I think it's something I would even refer to even now in my career. In your view, if we were to demystify smart conflict, what does it actually even mean? That is a great question. So the reason we decided to call the methodology and the book Smart Conflict is that one of the unlocks for people is sometimes to realize that you do have a choice about how you show up when things get a little bit stressful and you find yourself in a conflict. I think there are times where we think, well, I must be authentic, or this is just how I am. And actually realizing that if you can learn to create that kind of gap between the stimulus and response, you have a choice about the way that you engage, or if you engage with it at all. So the thing that we want to introduce to people is this idea of situational flexibility. And that does mean being smart, and it does mean being intelligent and kind of making those decisions. Am I going to avoid the conversation because strategically nothing good is going to come from it? Am I going to have it, but I'm going to work out how to create the conditions to really collaborate, something we call task conflict, which we can talk about in a bit, and how we do that where we're working on the problem together. Am I actually going to have to be quite inflexible and deliver an inflexible message, but without getting cross about it, and commit to that inflexibility, even if it's quite uncomfortable for me to do that, because I'd rather compromise or I'd rather give in. So it's really thinking about taking that flexible approach, and realizing that even if we haven't been very good at this or we have certain defaults, that we can learn how to kind of flex and overcome them.
Yeah, I love that. I spent a lot of my career in internal audit within financial services, and it was such a big part. It's reminding people that we are all on the same team. And even just last week, I was reminded of an amazing Japanese proverb: individually, we're one drop, together, we are an ocean. And the bit that you pulled out around, I think it's task and relational, the difference between the two, I love that part. And do you mind just explaining a little bit more around that concept and why you chose to really flesh it out at the start of your book?
Well, I think one of the things that's quite traditional to do, I suppose, in terms of a book order is to really sort of make the case for why you might want to think about upskilling in this and why you might want to continue reading the book to find out how to do it. So I suppose what we did up front really was try to present the facts around why is it worth kind of spending some time getting better at conflict. And a core part of that is helping people think about why might you want to get better at conflict? Isn't that something we should be avoiding, that we should, want less of? And so, as Louise sort of talked to there, we really want to make sure that at least as the starting point, we've got this shared understanding with the reader that not all conflict, is the same, and that the right kind of conflict can actually lead to like incredible gains, like this 22% upswing in performance. So it's not just about minimizing kind of pain and problems. It's actually about realizing the opportunity and all the kind of performance gains, but also the commercial gains that you can get when you've got the right kind of conflict. So at its heart, you have to understand how to recognize the right kind from the wrong kind. So this task-focused conflict, which is let's debate whether we're making the right decision. Are we working in the best way? Are we moving this project forward, both in terms of quality and speed and all the things that we want? Or are we arguing about who's right and who's wrong, who's more important, who's got the power? Do we feel connected and seen? And is there all the stuff that is kind of the debating and the fighting about who's pulling their weight, all that kind of thing is the relational conflict. And what we spend quite a lot of our time talking to our clients about is how to refocus on the impact on the task, which could be the shared project, the goals of the business, but something that is more of a shared problem between us.
Yeah, that's so great because you're coming really into why it's so important and the real benefits as to by addressing it, that you're aware of it, what are the benefits for leaders, for the organizations, for their teams. I know your book covers a lot around the 5R model, and it's such a strong backbone to the whole concept of the book. Do you mind explaining more what that 5R model is?
I will try and do it as briefly as I can. So obviously there's 55,000 words that kind of laid this out. But yes, the 5Rs are so reflection. So we would think about reflecting on our own settings when it comes to conflict, how we tend to show up, how we've shown up in the past, where we know behaviorally we go if we're triggered, but also beginning to think about how other people might show up in our presence, what their defaults are, and how we can kind of create a strategy going into it, knowing that's going to kind of maybe occur between us. So that's reflection. The second is regulation. So this is about the literal regulation of your nervous system. So how you show up in a conversation is going to directly influence how somebody else shows up in your presence. So how we enter it, even maybe what we call the meeting or how much or little information we give in that kind of diary invitation can trigger somebody into threat. So if you kind of go, feedback conversation, you might be thinking, what is about to happen? Whereas if I give you a bit more context, you've got, okay, I know what you're going to talk about. And so even those small things, we can trigger people into a threat response. But more so, it's about how we are showing up in the conversation. And actually, the way and how regulated we are, how calm and graceful we are, will really impact how the other person responds to us and the kind of conversation we want to bring. The third is readiness. That we talk through our 5-part hard conversation framework, which is really a structure, how to prepare for that conversation. So kind of the stages you might go through, forms of words you might use, or factors that you might consider about how and when you have the conversation, and really getting kind of a plan in place so you can go in feeling prepared. What we know a lot of people do is they see something appear in their diary and they think, okay, I'll just go in and wing it. And they kind of close their eyes and hope for the best, and then wonder why they're not getting the result that they wish for. So that readiness can be transformational. The fourth is response. So this is one of the things that really puts us off having hard conversations, is that either I don't know how the other person will respond and I don't know how I'm going to handle it, or I'm not sure if I'm going to be able to keep myself together and respond as my best professional self. So we talk in the book about various strategies we can have in place to know how to respond if something unexpected happens, but also if we need to end the conversation because it's going down a route that we are not ready to go down, that we can end it elegantly without kind of looking panicked or uncool or making things worse. And the fifth and really important part of the 5 R's is repair. So it's this concept that even if you have a hard conversation, even if you get everything wrong and the other person is upset, there is always the possibility of repairing it and going back and having another go and being able to move on. And I think one of the things that we're learning in terms of why individuals, but also whole organizations, avoid having hard conversations or giving clear feedback is they think, if I upset the other person, one, they're going to be demotivated and spin out and they might not want to work for me anymore. But two, I'm really going to upset them. I'm going to damage the relationship and we're not going to be able to come back from it. Actually sweeping away that kind of misconception is that we have to sometimes rupture the relationship a little bit to be able to move forward in our growth. And also by going through that process, it builds trust. Because if I can have a hard conversation with you and then I go back and go, look, that's something I need you to fix, but we're okay. Like, you don't need to spin out. I still respect you. You're a valued part of the team. I do need you to fix this. The more we're going to get into that way of relating, the more resilient our relationship is to us giving each other challenge and knowing it's going to be okay. And it can kind of really inoculate you from that kind of, oh, I've got to give some feedback and, it's going to be this big deal. It's no longer a big deal because the trust is there that this is how we do things around here.
I love the bit around the readiness, and I just think your whole book is such a wonderful pick and mix of all these amazing concepts that you hear from Brené Brown books to, I know you called out Julia Gottman's quote around it.
Yeah.
The conversation you have, what really matters is the fact that you can go and repair it. I know from people I work with, the readiness, like you said, it's something that people find that they have to practice, they have to really prepare, they have to go in thinking they're having more transactional conversations just so that they can get across their point, and they've done that preparation. But I guess your view and the work that you do, what is one of the harder R's that people find harder to adopt and implement?
Oh, that's an interesting question.
Yeah.
My instinctive answer, I'm curious to see what your thinking is, Louise, is that it really does vary by the individual, because one of the sort of the things that we talk about these 5 Rs is that, they're not a tick list to work through, that they are, it is a model that you can use to triage, where am I in this? And I think it not only will vary by individual, but by the context that individual is in. So our expectation is that depending on whatever the reason is that you're returning to pick up this book to remind yourself of like what to do next, that sometimes the right answer will be to go to reflect, sometimes it will be to go to regulate, sometimes it will be to go to repair. And we have written the book purposely in a way that means you don't have to read it from page 1 to page whatever number of pages it is now, that you can just go directly to the bit you need when you need it. And I think the reason we've done that is because we expect it to be different all the time. So for some people, self-regulation is really, really hard. They really struggle to contain their emotions. And for some people, they sort of have worked out what works for them and they've got that down. So I know, I think it's hard to say one is
Yeah. I mean, I think we've done so much of this work recently in the last year. We've probably taken about we will have taken about 20,000 people through the training in various guises. One of the themes that arises a lot is the reflect and regulate, because these are the areas where you need that kind of self-awareness. So you need to kind of go, I've got to be honest with myself that I do have some defaults. So it's really interesting. Often when we teach it, people go, oh no, I'm absolutely situationally flexible. But I always think about the time when somebody pulled out in front of you a roundabout and like cuts you off, and your nervous system responds. Some people, will get into absolute rage. Some people will kind of panic. There is that kind of nervous system default. Do I go to aggression if I'm really triggered? Do I sort of freeze if I find somebody aggressive in my presence? And even beginning to realize that perhaps we do have some defaults in how we show up, and we're not admitting it to ourselves. And perhaps the way we're showing up to somebody else, the way we conceive ourselves, isn't how that other person is seeing us. I think sometimes people have some aha moments around that, going, God, maybe I'm more aggressive than I think. Or maybe I think I'm collaborative, but what I'm constantly doing is accommodating the other person. But I've sort of got a story I'm telling myself about this. So that can be really interesting, the self-awareness piece. And the thing that's coming up more and more that I do think is fascinating when we talk about regulation at scale, a lot of people are brave enough to say, but how do I know when I'm becoming dysregulated? And they're very cut off from their body. They don't have the body awareness to kind of go, what are the signs that it's all beginning to build up and I'm getting into that kind of fight, flight, or freeze? And it's sort of wonderful because we say, well, that's great. So then learn to tune in. Where do you feel it? Is it in your upper chest? Is it your stomach? Is it a sharp pain, a tight feeling? Did your chest get tight? Like, just begin to tune into your body, because your body will be telling you that you're about to get into a place where you're going to get dysregulated. And even that's been a bit of an aha moment for us, because as coaches, we're kind of like, oh, just tune in. So when you'll know when you're becoming dysregulated. And so many people say, I just blow. And so even that, I think a lot of people struggle with, is to sense and be okay with the fact that we all get dysregulated, but learn what the signs are that it's beginning to you're beginning to lose control in some way.
That's so fascinating, because actually what I'm hearing is really making others aware through their conflict resolution styles that how quickly can you emotionally intelligently regulate those emotions and be aware of how you're showing up and what's going on internally. For me personally, I absolutely love chapter 4, where you talk about genetics, family, culture, belonging, how that can impact your conflict resolution styles. Do you mind telling us a bit more, in your view, why you chose to include that, particularly quite early on in the book, as a reminder as to how that can impact your conflict style?
Yeah. Firstly, we wrote about things that we found really interesting. And so I think we found those things really interesting, and we thought, well, maybe other people would find that interesting too. So I think it's good to write about things that you are motivated to write about. But I think it's another piece of the puzzle where you go, I think it's helpful as part of this reflect piece, actually, is in a way we sort of start with reflection ourselves, in terms of just helping people understand that our starting points are very different, and that the way we're experiencing the world is not necessarily how everybody else is, because of all of these factors. And I just think, there's lots of sort of systemic reasons why conflict is difficult for different groups of people. So I think it's partly that sort of intellectually we find that stuff super interesting. It might not be for everyone. And I think, again, the beauty of the book, in terms of how we've tried to design it, is if that's not something you're particularly interested in, you can just go straight to the 5 R's and just learn the how. But the context, you're not the first person to say that that's their favourite chapter. I think it's my favourite chapter.
But I think the reason, as well as, I think one of the reasons we're fascinated by it, is it comes up so often in our practice, either that somebody will be sort of paralyzed by conflict and go, I just can't do it. And doing a bit of reflection on, that's because in my household, if somebody spoke up, then they wouldn't be, nobody would talk for 2 weeks. And so there's been sort of a kind of thinking error, which is, if I speak up, then the consequences are unbearable. And even sometimes going, well, I'm not a child in that household anymore, and that's not true, but isn't it interesting that I'm still carrying this thing kind of within me? That can be very useful. I think the other thing that's increasingly coming up is around the cultural differences in communication and our assumptions, and how we don't realize that the things that are obvious to us are not the same things that are obvious to other people culturally. And that's about the meaning of directness. How direct can we be? How indirect must we be? What must we imply? How much do we assume people are reading our sort of non-verbal implied communication? And this is where a lot of misunderstanding takes place. In a workshop this week, one of the participants is a very senior leader. He was joking, but there was a serious point. He went, we were just talking about, they were doing some work on a hard conversation that they needed to have. And he joked and he said, what we've discovered is you can't compromise with a Frenchman, which we laughed about. But then we're like, there is a serious point in here in terms of how you're showing up and the style that you're bringing. Is there something cultural going on about sort of our British indirectness and sort of finding this direct communication quite difficult? And what could we think about, using some of the techniques that we talk about to get over those cross-cultural differences? Could that unlock it? So I think that's coming up more and more. And people don't necessarily realize they think somebody's being obstructive or rude or evasive. And actually, it's because culturally, they can't meet you where you are, or you can't meet them where they are. And that's maybe the thing that is the unlock.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think when you spoke about references to the culture map in that chapter as well, I got to work here around cultural intelligence. So really, yes, to be emotional intelligence. And so much of what you've brought out there, I love how you've combined it between family dynamics and your birth order. And what is something that you think when the readers are reading the book, they'll genuinely be quite surprised by?
I think they will be surprised by the fact that we are arguing for more conflicts at work. I think there's a lot of writing about kindness and care and the era of the empathetic leader, and all of those things are wonderful, but not in isolation. So if by being kind it means that we are prioritizing surface harmony, but then we're having back channel conversations and we're kind of telling tales, without saying something to somebody's face. There's nothing really healthy about that in terms of a team dynamic, even if you never disagree in the room. Also, something that will surprise people is that we are sort of slightly challenging that kind of the idea of the purely empathetic leader as somebody who is just constantly supportive and kind of always making concessions, and thinking about how can you be both empathetic and sort of challenging in terms of performance in tandem. And when is there a time for one thing? When are we doing both together? When is it just a time that we actually do need to just bring that challenge and be very clear and inflexible? That's probably something which our participants are surprised by, that we kind of go, yeah, you want more conflict. You need to say more hard things, but there's a very particular way in which you can do that. So you're actually building your team culture and you're building your performance and you're building trust rather than destroying it. And that can be a real surprise and then a kind of major aha moment about what we could do differently.
There is another thing that occurred to me as well that we hear a lot, which is that it's almost embarrassing how easy it is to implement what we're suggesting without doing any sort of further dramatic change in our self-awareness, or that you can actually take it's a very, very practical kind of implementation plan, and you can do it no matter kind of who you are. And lots of our clients don't have enormous, emotional EQ, because we work with a lot of finance people, don't we? And some of those have incredibly high EQ. But it's interesting because we have worked with quite a few audiences where the sorts of brains that will take on the kinds of jobs that they do are less relational in their nature. So they might be more introverted. And, for just as an example, and I think I feel like we have strength tested this with people who could find it really, really hard to kind of learn new relational techniques. And actually, it's been amazing to see that they kind of go, gosh, for something that I have been struggling with for so many years, I literally can go and do something differently tomorrow. I know what to do. It makes sense to me that this is going to work, and I've got the confidence to go and do it. And I think that's why we could write a book about it as well, because you actually could get what you need from reading the book.
Yeah, absolutely. What I definitely took away from the book, and it's such a lovely takeaway, even with what you're saying, is you can still be a very compassionate leader and have smart conflict, because compassionate leadership does not always look soft. And it still supports that development, that growth, that team cohesiveness, all the systemic stuff needed for a effective team. Out of all the tools that you provided, what are 2 or 3 practical tools you think any team, any leader could start to pick up straight away?
That's a really good question. I mean, I think the answer will be different between the individual and the team. On an individual level, one of the things that we would invite everyone to do is go and have a look at the conflict styles and begin thinking about where their defaults are, and begin understanding the benefits and costs of each style and situationally where they're appropriate, and really learn that you can choose and you can actually sort of pre-plan, okay, how am I going to enter this conversation? If they go here, where am I going to go? And kind of think about how you might gain that out. Because if you've got low conflict confidence, in fact, how many people say, oh my God, I can't bear conflict. Like, I just can't stand it at all. That can be quite a barrier. So looking at the conflict styles and going, oh, there are different ways I could do this. It's not a case of either I avoid it or I kind of go in all guns blazing. There are sort of different options I can choose, and I can kind of almost lead a symphony of like styles that I might use in even one conversation. I think individually that would be great. The other thing individually is to find some kind of in the moment self-regulation technique that you can use. So either in the moment that you do it in the sort of minute before you're going to open the door, so you get yourself regulated and grounded. If you're feeling nervous, feeling angry, or any kind of charged emotion, taking that in with you is going to be a very bad idea. So just finding a way to regulate. I think at an individual level, those would be the 2 I would go to first. At team level, Alice, what do you think is the kind of the easiest go-to?
Oh, at a team level. We talked, didn't we, quite a bit when we were writing the book about how far do we go with the team angle and so on and so forth. And we thought maybe that might be a follow-up book. And we have got a downloadable guide for teams on our website that accompanies the book that does give you that kind of lens. But I think I think the reflection exercises are a really useful thing to do in a team context, and thinking about, well, okay, how are we showing up as individuals, but what does that mean for the team, and the diversity in the team in terms of how we think about managing and recovering from those difficult conversations. The repair piece, if you were to just do one thing, then that's probably the thing we often end up saying, don't we? That no matter what, if you learn the art of repair, then you can get things back on track. So the most impactful tool is the framework for what is the structure for this conversation.
Agreeing that this is how we do it. This is how we structure the conversation. So we're just always going to go through these 5 stages to make sure that we haven't gone from, well, here's the problem and here's the solution. But we have, with some teams, and it is amazing, done an exercise, and you could do this internally, is to say, what do we do here when we've disagreed? What do we do when we've fallen out? Because what people tend to do is completely ignore it and go away and either get very worried. So they might ruminate and think, right, I've done it now, I'm about to get fired, or this person hates me. And actually, we do a lot of mind reading. So often, we talk about this in the book, we sort of assume that we know what's in the other person's mind. They might be thinking something entirely different or nothing at all that might not have affected them in the same way it's affected you. But we tell this story in a vacuum of rumination. about what's happened. And by avoiding it, we allow both parties to do that. But then we're not also kind of solving the root issue of why we've fallen out. So I think one of the things we get teams to do is say it's fine to fall out. It's fine to have a bit of a kind of set to. How are you going to agree that you're going to behave once that's happened? Like, what are your team agreements? You know, we go and check in, so we don't leave somebody spinning out. We go back and check in. How do we go again? And what are kind of the rules of the game? If we've fallen out, what agreements are we going to make about having that conversation in a kind of task conflict way? Weirdly, that can be the unlock, and we could just start there before they're even ready to think about using different conflict styles, because they're already in such an unhealthy way of relating. Going there and going, right, we just need to work out how we get better at saying sorry, how we get better at going, oh, I didn't mean that, mate. What I meant was this, or are you okay? Or, oh God, I think I bit your head off. I didn't intend to do that. That wasn't about you. Doing that first can then be the unlock for a lot of the other things that they would need to do as a team.
That point is so valid and so important. When I think of team coaching, often we create team charters and contracts. And what you're saying is, through that ways of working, before it even happens, discuss when we have conflict, how are we going to repair? What does that look like? And in the individual piece, when you were speaking about regulating your own emotions, when I was thinking about it as you were speaking, it's very much being aware what emotions get triggered in us with different people can be very different. So it's being aware as who triggers what emotions in you, and then learning how to regulate that when you know you're meeting them or speaking to them. At the book, who is it really for?
It was interesting. We had quite a lively debate with the publisher about this, because there was quite a lot of pressure to be really specific. So it's for HR leaders, or and to really kind of, and actually what we did in the writing process, and to be able to write, you do need to be able to have the person that you imagine reading it in your mind, because it can really help you stay on track in terms of the level of detail you need to go into and stay focused. What we ended up doing was having a little collection of people in our mind, because we were like, well, look, yes, HR leaders for sure, but also yes, execs, as in the C-suite and leaders of businesses. And we wanted it to be in our minds. We were like, it's people who are popping in to the bookshop at the airport, about to get on a plane, and this is on their mind because there's either not enough conflict or there's too much of the wrong kind going on in their teams or their business. And they kind of see this and they go, it's worth a try, because if this could unlock these challenges, it would be transformational for us. So I think there's that. And I think the thing that we couldn't keep ignoring was this idea that actually, and I think it's come out in terms of how the feedback that we're getting now, it's out on shelves, is that actually it is for almost anyone. In terms of sectors, level, like you could be starting out in a job, a grad level, and I think you would get something from the book. And you could be a seasoned CEO and you could get something from the book. So
yeah, and we've had that feedback, right? So many people. So there was a degree to which I think we were writing the book for our younger selves to a degree. So thinking, gosh, imagine all the dreadful mistakes I've made and all the horrible kind of alarm clock moments I've had in my self-awareness, realizing how I'm showing up in a way that, is really problematic for other people. And if I just had a framework to read through and gone, oh, it's actually both more difficult than I thought and actually quite obvious now I've read it. So I think we've had that feedback. It's sort of, this is great, because this is now, as I'm looking forward up the chain through my career, I can imagine exactly kind of how I could navigate this and get a bit of self-awareness about where the traps are. I had a really very lovely conversation with a CEO of a massive, very well-known enterprise, who said that she had bought it and she had read it on the flight from Heathrow to New York, and she had to go and have a conversation, I think with a board member, who she was quite worried about, and she didn't really know where to go with it. And she said, I absolutely loved it because, one, it's really digestible. I managed to almost read the whole thing in sort of the 6-hour flight. But when I got there, I realized the thing I needed to do was to make a repair. with this person. And so if I hadn't read it, I think I probably would have gone in quite defensive and combative, completely the other way. And she'd come up with a repair strategy on the plane. I was thinking, gosh, I hadn't quite expected somebody of your seniority, maturity in leadership kind of level to say, this has provided an unlock for quite a tricky situation. So I think we have been surprised at the degree to which we were sort of right to be a little bit styling it out with our publisher to kind of go, we have a suite of people in our minds when we're writing this. I think we just about pulled it off.
I totally agree. I used to work in an organization where in our annual conference, everybody from graduate to MD was gifted the same book. One year we went through the Squiggly Careers, and I just think this is a book that I would 100% agree that anyone from analyst all the way through to MD could read it, and actually probably organizations would benefit from doing that, because then everybody's read the same thing and everybody can go in same concepts and same values.
Yeah. No, that makes so much sense, and actually is certainly in our kind of workshop coaching training kind of practice. What tends to happen is we'll go in and work with like the exec or the C-suite, and then they'll be like, well, now everyone needs to know this because we want everybody to have this shared expectation, this shared language. So it's not unusual for us to end up doing firm-wide training for that exact reason. Yeah, that makes so much sense. So it's great to hear that was your experience too.
I love the book because, like I said before, it's got loads of images, loads of diagrams, loads of quotes. What was your favorite quote that you've included within the book?
Well, the answer to this is quite funny because there was a quote in there that we had to take out because we hadn't negotiated with the estate of the person who wrote it at Leonard Cohen. And it's one of my favourite quotes. It's from a song called Anthem. And it is, there is a crack in everything. It's how the light gets in. And again, it was a kind of around that idea of rupture, sometimes being the thing that illuminates your relationship, sort of lets the light in on something important and it not necessarily being bad. And it kind of backs up that idea that it's the relationships that sort of have conflicts and learn how to incorporate it and come through it that have the highest quality and the kind of most growth. That you have to kind of accept there's a crack in everything, and you can either make it feel like it's something that's sort of damaging, or you can kind of go, oh no, actually this is something, it's illuminating something important. It's what we do with the light that gets in.
Beautiful.
And the fact that it was so hard to find a replacement quote that we liked is quite interesting and indicative of the fact that the poets have not written that much, as it turns out, about this idea of rupture and repair and of conflict being, the way through and the way forward, because it was really, really hard to find something that stood up to that quote.
I love that. I'm going to look into it. It sounds so beautiful. And what is one key takeaways you would like every reader to take away from your book?
I think firstly, the commitment to the idea that it's really important to get good at conflict at work, but there is a right way of doing it. And there is I think we can be pretty clear that there's a wrong way of doing it, and knowing the difference between the two, but committing yourself to learning that skill from whatever starting place that you're in, and moving forward from there.
Such a good point, particularly when people feel they are stuck in very toxic environments where they might have toxic relationships with their line manager. Actually, it's really unpicking what is really going on and feeling comfortable to have that smart conflict in the right way. It's so important. Intent is often there. People try and do it the right way, but it's not always done the right way. So that's a really wonderful takeaway. Thank you, Louise. And Alice?
I think I'll go back to repair and talk about the fact that, if you're currently stuck in a tricky dynamic or a team that just doesn't seem to be kind of collaborating in the way that you want to be, so there's some kind of conflict going on, just to kind of know that assuming that you and the other party would like things to improve, so that's a big if, but assuming that you do want things to improve, it's entirely possible. However bad it seems right now, it's entirely possible. So just to have hope and to, use some of the very practical ideas in the book to start to kind of unlock that.
Yeah. Thank you so much, both. This is why I love having these podcast conversations, because you really get a flavor around the intention behind a lot of the concepts and topics that you pulled out in your book. So thank you so much for taking the time out to share that today.
Yeah, let's see what's that share.
And it's great to hear more about how the discussion around the book in your book club, and to hear kind of how interested that they've been in the different tools and techniques. So that's been really nice to hear.
Always really reassuring.
Thank you so much for listening to the Coaching Chapters podcast. If you enjoyed this episode, please follow the podcast and leave a quick rating and share it with someone who would love this conversation. Until next time, keep learning, keep reflecting, and keep growing.